What is up, my dashing dudes? I am the Hans TV, and today we get to find out what happened when an entitled dad's kid doesn't get the grade he wants in today's episode of r/entitled people. Our first post comes from Terrific Moose. Entitled brother fakes illness to milk my parents of their retirement savings. So I grew up in a middle-class family in a low-income area. My dad built his dream house there, and even though they could afford to move, they never wanted to. My parents had a tendency to spoil my older brother far more than me, mostly because I was the quiet one who never spoke up. This resulted in my brother getting his way more often than me. Nothing blatant, but I knew it was enough to give him an entitlement complex a mile wide. So, when my brother was a teenager, he struggled with some serious mental illnesses. These were absolutely legitimate, and crippled his ability to function for several years. My parents were obviously very concerned for him, and so they willingly paid top dollar for the best psychiatrists and psychologists that they could find to help him. By the time I was ready to go to a different city to start university, my brother was at a stage where he was ready to go as well. It was decided that he would go to a university in the same city as me, and we would live together. My parents offered to pay for our rent all the way through university, so us flatting together obviously made a lot of financial sense for them. We would have to pay for everything else out of our student loans. Everything was set. We'd found a good student flat, settled in, etc. He had a new care team in this city. Awesome. Unfortunately, my brother had an episode on his first day that resulted in him not going to class. This meant he was removed from his program, compulsory first day, with the option of starting again in the second semester. Now, the obvious, logical, and sensible thing to do in that situation is for my brother to go home while I found a roommate to take the spare bedroom, and he can move back up and try again next semester. My brother didn't like that idea. You see, he has always hated living at home, and he would always whine about how our old house was or how poor our neighborhood looked. Our neighborhood was lovely, great sense of community, and I always loved it there. But he felt that he deserved better. Next thing we know, his new psychologist was written a letter to my parents stating that it would be a good idea to allow him to stay living in the new city, to allow him to acclimate to his surroundings. My parents followed this advice and allowed him to stay. They replaced his weekly loan amount with an allowance of the same value, and thought everything would move forward from there. This worked for a few weeks, but my brother started to hound my parents for more money. You see, he wasn't a student, so in his mind, why should he have to live like a student? No instant noodles and TV dinners for him. He wanted steak and lamb for dinner. He wanted to go to nice restaurants with his friends and go shopping whenever he felt like it. He wanted a new iPhone and a MacBook because his was slow, etc. My parents eventually gave in and doubled his allowance. Second semester rolls around and my brother hasn't even bothered enrolling. My parents weren't happy, but his psychologist writes him another letter, so it continues. Fast forward 3 years, and I am graduating with a job from my university in my field. The apartment is nice and convenient to my new job, so I continue to live there, only now I pay for my half of the rent and utilities. My brother is still not working or studying, and his allowance is now almost equal to my salary. Every time my parents try to force him home, his psychologist writes another letter, and my parents' trust in my brother's care team was high. They did save his life after all. By this point, my parents are just paying for his half of the utilities, directly on top of his allowance. I suggested my parents to get a second medical opinion, as he had been seeing this psychologist almost weekly for 3 years with no improvement, but my brother flat out refuses. He likes her. She speaks to his soul, whatever that means. About a year and a half after I graduate, our landlord decides to sell the apartment, and the new owners want to live there. Normal thing that happens, but I'm not bothered by this. I wanted to take the opportunity to get my own place. I have a serious girlfriend whom I want to eventually marry, so would like my own space that she could one day move into, and just generally move on with my adult life. But my parents don't want my brother living on his own just yet, and again he is refusing to come home. They beg me to stay for just 1 more year while they figure out an arrangement for him. We got rather short notice to move, so I can understand this, and 1 more year won't matter too much to me. So apartment hunting we go. My brother goes fully off the entitled deep end. He will only view apartments well outside of our price range. Anything within budget is either too old or too small or too dark or too ugly. He wants a new, modern apartment in an expensive suburb in the heart of the city. His psychologist writes another letter outlining the importance of comfortable living for him. My parents cave in once again and agree to get his dream apartment for him, but I couldn't afford the other half of the new rent. They compromised with me, and I only have to pay the same rent as I was before, which is barely 1/3 of the rent at the new place, mind you. It's a beautiful apartment, so I was okay with this deal even though I wasn't happy. Unfortunately, my brother is now used to getting everything he wants or needs. He starts asking me to pay for more and more of the groceries. Idiot me, thinking that mom and dad had cut down on his allowance, now that the rent is so expensive, agreed to take up some of the slack. Big mistake. They were still giving him the same amount. He just wanted more. He starts asking me for more and more things and then whines to mom when I won't give it to him. My parents cave over and over again and get him whatever he wants. New computer, new MacBook, new iPhone, heck, even a car. Up until this point, my parents could afford all of this and somehow still save well for their retirement. My mom was completely honest with me about their finances, as when the time came for the power of attorney would transfer to me, so she wanted me to know where they stood. They were on track for a long, comfortable retirement. But then my dad unfortunately lost his job through very unusual circumstances. His company just disappeared and his boss left the country. This messed my dad up for quite a while, and he decided it was time to kick back and enjoy an early retirement. He was only 2 years short of retirement age anyway. My brother was furious. He would rage about how dad had betrayed him for not continuing to work to fund his lifestyle. He would regularly yell at my mom over the phone, saying that he expects them to continue to support him because he deserves the security of the lifestyle he has earned. I laughed my butt off at that line, which turned into another long fight, but was totally worth it. I knew that without my dad's income, my parents couldn't afford the rent where we lived, so I decided to force the issue and moved into my own place. I'd hoped that this would result in my brother moving as well, but alas, his psychologist wrote him another letter, and he continued to live there. I moved on with my life, got married, went back to university, and bought a house. Grown-up stuff. 5 years go by, and I have virtually no contact with my brother. I'm visiting my parents one day. When I take them out for lunch, my mom breaks down crying because she can't pay. It turns out that my brother had been blackmailing my parents to continue to support him, saying that if they didn't, he'd end up homeless and it would be their fault, etc. He still had the full support of his medical team, and my parents didn't know what to do. He had burned through nearly 20 years worth of retirement savings since I moved out. My parents were both forced to go back to work to try and stretch out their retirement savings. I decided to visit this psychologist myself, only to find out she is one of those tell people what they want to hear so they keep giving me money predatory type psychologist who was enabling my brother because he was a cash cow for her. Our entire family was furious. Turns out my brother had been recovered since his first year living away from home. He was perfectly able to work or study. He just didn't want to, and so she wrote him those bogus letters to let him get away with it. He decided to milk my parents of their savings to fund his lifestyle because he had earned it, and they owed him for not giving him what he wanted when he was younger. When confronted about it, he was entirely unapologetic. As far as he is concerned, he was entitled to everything he got and then some. It's been a few years since then, and my parents have completely cut him off. They are surviving, but within a few years, I will probably end up having to support them. I have no issue with this. I'm their son, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to do so. But it breaks my dad's heart knowing this. He grew up dirt poor and worked his butt off to provide for us, only to see it all disappear because of my selfish brother. The psychologist had our license suspended after my parents laid a complaint. I don't know if it was temporary or not, but I hope it was permanent. As for my brother, he works a dead-end retail job with a live-in boyfriend who pays for almost everything. He's still an entitled butt, and I only see him during Christmas. I just want to emphasize, my brother had legitimate health issues. I do not want to take away from that at all. He just chose to willfully deceive everyone about the severity in order to demand that everyone give him the life he feels he deserves. And before you ask, no, his mental illness did not contribute towards this attitude. It's not that sort of illness. He's just an entitled dickwad. So basically what I'm getting from this OP is that your brother is a psychopath. No emotion, no feeling bad for what he's done. He's just an entitled psychopath who thinks he deserves everything. This next post comes from Pile a Baby. Mother feels entitled to iPad. Newly joined. Posts I've read have inspired me to share. Last year, my iPad crapped out and I bought a new one to replace it. Sounds normal, right? When my mother first heard, she was pretty upset and commented on how thoughtless I was. I believe her exact words were, "Where is my iPad? I want one." She then went to insist that I was selfish and horrible. To her, I should have bought her and my 20-year-old sister iPads instead. This still boggles my mind to this day. It should be noted that I work full-time and am a full-time university student, and she doesn't work at all. Neither does my sister. Mom, where is my iPad? Son, where's your job? Our final post comes from PlantedJenny67. Prison bait? Okay, so this happened a while ago, but I am still blown away by this ED's total gall. Backstory. I've been a writing teacher for many years, so I have a good idea of what good writing looks like at the high school level, and what bad writing looks like. My school is a private school, and while it's not the most expensive one in the world, it's not cheap. I don't remember the specific assignment, but the kid in question wrote a so-so essay, earning a very generous C+. I thought that was more than fair, and I included a lot of commentary, so the student could find ways to improve her writing. At my school, we have a study period after school so students can come by for help or to make up a test or just to hang out and study. If a parent needs to see us, they are expected to make an appointment or to come after school and after the study hour. But the rules didn't seem to apply to ED. He storms into my room, demanding to know why his precious darling got such a low grade. He said that his friend looked it over and that his friend is a college professor, so if the professor liked it, it must be worth an A. Never mind that a college professor probably thinks that anything halfway decent written by a 15-year-old kid is brilliant, but no matter. I offered to go over the comments with him, but he wasn't having it. He wanted an A for his precious darling, and nothing else would do. When I wasn't caving into his demands, ED then had temerity to ask, "What is your highest level of education?" I replied, "I have 2 master's degrees, what about you?" He snarled, "I have a PhD in metaphysics." Just an aside, metaphysics is a branch of philosophy that deals with principles of things. Its definition is abstract theory with no basis in reality. Back to the story. Well, la-dee-da. Entitled Dad stormed out, furious that he didn't get his way. Boo-hoo. I got nervous that he would complain to the vice principal, so I decided to let her know what happened. And when I told her about the PhD in metaphysics, she said, "What is that?" No idea. Later, another colleague suggested that a PhD in metaphysics sounded like one of those online degrees that people get in prison to improve their lives. Nothing wrong with that. I'm always a fan of self-improvement. What I'm not a fan of is an entitled jerk trying to come off as somehow superior and thus entitled to get his way, despite the reality of the situation. Then I got angry. Angry enough to say, who is this guy? Who does he think he is? So I googled his name, not to get revenge or harass him or anything, just to find out who this guy is. I was curious. Turns out the guy really had been in prison for 7 years for fraud. He pulled his child out of our school at the end of the term. Never saw them again. Nice kid though. The comment that somebody posted on OP's post sums it up completely. He essentially has a PhD in philosophy. What an absolute tosser. I feel bad for his child. Well, that's going to do it for today's episode of r/EntitledPeople. I hope you liked the stories, and if you did, I'll link them down in the description below as always. And if you liked the video, subscribe, drop a like, and a comment down below what you'd like to see me read next. A humongous thank you to all of my subscribers and followers. I cannot thank y'all enough for pushing me to do this and make it better for you guys. But with that being said, I will see you in the next video.